Thank you. Yeah, welcome. I keep it short. You have heard my name is Christian Egenhoff, Associate Senior Research Fellow here and a Senior Research Associate at the Florence School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute. Thanks, Irina, for hosting this and inviting us. This workshop on gas 5 years ago, before COVID, normally natural gas was not a discussion in Brussels. It was fairly unexciting, seen as a transition fuel, not a fuel, transition fuel. We are falling off the cliff in 2030, 25 to 35. Whenever you think it was cheap, secure, and then around later in the decade, there is hydrogen picking up. So that was a bit the narrative. I also told then my students when they wanted to do a master thesis, said, look, maybe natural gas is not the right thing if you want to make a career in Europe. Maybe think do about something else. And here we are, 5, 6 years later. We are discussing gas again. It's back on the agenda. It's expensive. The market has changed, and we discussed this morning, very, very different perspective of how this market has changed and how it will evolve. And the countries try to adapt, and among them are, EU is not a country, but the jurisdiction, the EU and Japan, Korea, trying to adapt to how this market works. So what we want to do today is to compare notes. So very thankful and grateful that you made all the way from Japan to share with us your insight and also your challenge, and you did challenge us on the one or the other point. So we hope to discuss, agree, disagree on the challenges that are all behind us, and maybe also identify areas for cooperation. Before I introduce the panel, let me just put, as long as your attention is still there, a few points of housekeeping. So each speaker has about 10 minutes, and I will be strict. So if I look to my mobile, I'm not doing my email, I'm just checking whether the time is running out. And occasionally, if our Japanese colleagues come up with numbers, yen per kilowatt, I will look it up, what it means in euros or in cent, and so you can always ask me for this. We hope to have a debate, so we count on you. If you widely disagree, just jump up and speak up, and then hopefully we have an informed question and an answer. And one important part, you always know it, when you speak up, please identify yourselves and be short and to the point, and no long statements if possible. So let me now introduce, and I'm asking people coming to taking their seats, so that seems to be mine. So the first is Toshi Sakamoto. He's from the for the Institute for Energy Economics in Japan, a well-known organization, and he's been a long time around on climate change, energy, and many other points, and we know each other for some time. Yes, and Toshi has always asked me to explain him the EU, and I don't know whether I succeeded, but now I've finally been able to turn the tables. Now you explain us the Japanese energy strategy. Heitze Simers, he's almost Japanese, as I've heard. He was a deputy head of the delegation in Tokyo, so he knows a fair deal about Japan, and we will test him on whether he knows a fair deal on energy. But, Toshi will be certainly helpful. We have also Felix Mattes. Please, Felix was always an advocate for a long time on electrification, and he was criticized for this forever. And now he turned to molecules and is criticized again. So I think he must do something right in this. And then finally, we have Mr. Kusuke Shida, who is from Mitsubishi Research Institute, and he got sort of the brief to go deeper into some of these issues. And if you have really questions to the Japanese situation, him and Toshi will be hopefully able to answer them. So all welcome to you. Toshi, I would then just ask you to kick off the discussion. The slides will be presented from the back. And here is the machine. You can speak from here or from there, whatever you prefer. You prefer from here. So this is your tool, you know that. And I'll vacate for you. So, please.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to express my deepest appreciation for this invitation to Brussels. It's good for me to be back to Brussels because I was based here for 3 years, many years ago. Christian asked me to provide a general picture on Japan's challenges towards energy transitions. And in doing so, I will explain the overview of the draft 7th Strategic Energy Plan. The Strategic Energy Plan is the most important energy policy document in Japan. The first one was adopted in 2003. Since then, every 3 to 4 years, it has been revised. And the 7th draft was released in the end of last year, and it went through public consultation process. And it attracted 40,000 comments from the general public, which is a record high number. It is expected that the cabinet will approve the final version as early as next Tuesday. The plan starts with setting out the major changes in environment since the previous plan, which was adopted 2021 October. First and foremost, the growing importance of economic security. This is obviously due to Russia's invasion to Ukraine 2022, as well as the unstable situation of Middle East. And increase in power demand. In the previous plan, we assumed that the power demand in Japan will decrease due to aging society. But this time around, due to more use of artificial intelligence, AI, as well as a data center and electrification towards carbon neutrality, we expect a significant growth of power demand in Japan. And thirdly, realistic approach while maintaining ambitious climate goal. The plan acknowledges this is the case in the European Union. And as you see, the global stock-take agreement, energy efficiency, renewable, and also natural gas, nuclear, CCUS, hydrogen, all those practical solutions were agreed upon in global stocktake. And the fourth one is integration of energy policy and industrial policy. I think this is the case in every part of the world right now. And with these 4 changes, government decided to keep its fundamental principles, S+3, safety, energy security, efficiency, and environment. But this time around, more emphasis, more weight was put on energy security and industrial competitiveness. The strong commitment to restraining the cost was emphasized, and the importance of decarbonized, affordable power sources was also emphasized in this plan. I expect that we will be discussing a renewable and a nuclear today's discussions. So I included this table explaining a 2040 power mix outlook in Japan. 2030 outlook was proposed in the previous strategic energy plan, 6th plan. And as you see, for renewable, the percentage contribution in the power sector, from 2030 to 2040, you will see just a modest increase for renewable. But as I said, the total power generation will increase from now on by 10 to 20%. So renewable power generation also needs to significantly increase, probably by 2 to 2.5 times compared with the current level. As for nuclear, as you see, the percentage is almost constant, 20%. But again, since the total power demand would increase, nuclear power generation needs to also increase. At this moment, only 14 nuclear power plants has restarted. In addition to those 14, 17 to 20 more nuclear power plant needs to be restarted. But some are waiting for local consent of local community, and some are still subject to regulatory review, and some has yet to file the application for restarting. So this is a long way to go. And the thermal, 30 to 40% in 2040. This is a modest decrease from 2030, which is a 42%. And in the previous sector, the government set forward the detailed figures for each of the fossil fuel, oil, LNG, coal, and hydrogen and ammonia. But this time around, they did not propose such a detailed figures for each of our fossil fuel. Government explained that this is because of technological uncertainties. I also included the figures from European Commission's communications 2040. S3 is at least 90% reduction, emission reduction in 2040 compared with 1990. As you see, there is a huge difference. What a stark difference between Japan's figure and the European Commission's proposal in 2040. I would like to introduce some relevant points for today's discussions. In our strategic energy plan, the previous one, the renewable was the first priority. It also said we need to decrease nuclear dependence as much as possible. That was the previous plan. But this time around, the plan said both renewable and nuclear are necessary. We need to maximize the use, both nuclear and renewables. But we have to consider the cost, electricity cost without and with integration cost. This is the figures included in the attachment to the 7th Strategic Energy Plan. As you see, LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, is the cost without integration cost. But it includes the cost for new construction as well as operational cost until the end of the life cycle. If you look at the LCOE, the cost without the integration cost, the solar might be the cheapest options. But as variable energy capacity increase its percentage in the power mix from 40, 50 to 60%, the solar power cost will significantly increase. And somewhere between 20 and 50%, the solar power's cost would exceed that of the nuclear power plant. And another important point of the new plan is that the government included a risk scenario in addition to a base scenario. This is a scenario where desired technological deployment cannot be achieved. In this case, LNG demand in 2040 will be 74 million tons per year in Japan. This is larger than the current level, which is 66 million tons LNG. GHG emission reduction target in 2040 compared with 2013. This was set at 73%. This is on the straight line between the connecting the 2030 target and 2050 net zero. This is my last slide, listing up to-do list. The point I will be explaining are not necessarily explicitly mentioned in the basic plan, energy strategic plan. This is my own observation, what needs to be done in the near future. The first is improvement of the predictability of investment in power sector. This is particularly the case nuclear and grid development. New financial assistance would be needed. The probably government will introduce a UK RAV type incentives, a regulated asset-based model. And also a clearer picture on kilowatt in addition to kilowatt hour would be necessary. And also decarbonization non-power sector. In our final energy consumption, power sector account for just 1/3. The remaining 2/3 are the thermal demand. How to decarbonize such a thermal demand is quite challenging task. An optimal mix of integration measures such as battery, natural gas, hydrogen, ammonia, demand response, that has to be elaborated. And also, medium and long-term policy, energy efficiency needs to be significantly improved. Perhaps this would be achieved through applying AI to end-use application. And hydrogen and CCUS. For hydrogen, Japan decided to introduce CFD, a contract for difference type incentives. It will apply for 15 years, but after 15 years, operators are obliged to continue hydrogen production for another 10 years without incentive. Many people argue that in order for that to happen, much higher carbon pricing would be necessary. And last but not least, industrial competitiveness. The plan said competitiveness is important, but what kind of policies and measures could be introduced, that has to be further considered in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toshi. I have just one question, or actually two. In the beginning, you said there's more weight to competitiveness and security. Will that be to the detriment of CO2? Now, you probably tell me no, but hydrogen is expensive. And then also CCUS, you have limited capacity for that. So where will these relatively cheap reduction sources be if you want to increase the industrial competitiveness? And then the second question was the nuclear point. I looked it up, 12.5 yen is 9 cents per kilowatt hour, which seems to be very low. Maybe existing, yes, but no nuclear for 9 cents seems to be very optimistic. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks for your...
Yeah, you're the first one to speak up.
Can I? Thank you for your question. As for the first question, industrial competitiveness can be enhanced by investing in clean energy technologies. That is the mindset of all governments all over the world. That's the case in the US, the European Union, and Japan. The future competitiveness will be coming from a clean energy technology area. So that's why the Japanese government decided to invest 20 trillion Japanese yen, which is 140 billion US dollars for the next 10 years, encouraging the investment in clean energy technology. So hydrogen, yeah, it might be costly at this moment. Ammonia, so is the ammonia. But by providing a significant investment incentives, the cost will be coming down, and that will increase the Japanese competitiveness, not only in Japan, but also the market in the third countries. The second question, I showed the electricity cost on solar and nuclear. This is the government working group's work. This is somehow mechanical calculations. The solar, we assume the lifetime is 25%, capacity factor 18%. For nuclear, 40% lifetime, and with a 70% capacity factor. Of course, it doesn't include political cost, and it doesn't include also the risk of nuclear accident. So the cost might be higher than what I have shown, but this is a result of our calculation based upon certain assumptions.
So, thank you very much. I'm on, yeah. Thank you very much. We are now coming to Heitze Siemers, looking a bit on the EU-Japan cooperation. opportunities, certainly in LNG, but I think this is more also on, industrial, innovation, etc., etc. So, Heitze, so what is your take, or what are your comments?
Right. First of all, good to see everybody. Very happy to be back in Brussels. I was in Tokyo until August. I'm still getting used to the weather, but that's I think that you never get used to this. But just to give you a few indications, so my perspective from having been in Tokyo and worked on EU-Japan relations in a broader context means also that I'm not a gas specialist. So what I'm going to be talking about now is really the overall kind of relationship that we have between the European Union and Japan, and where the complementarities and added value of our cooperation is, which is quite significant, to be honest. And I'm basically going to be talking about what we have in common, what we don't have in common, and where are the areas where we can really do some additional work. So what do we have in common? First of all, fairly obvious. We have low own energy resources, at least in the classical sense. We have to import our fuels, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's uranium. And one of the things that I remember from the time in Tokyo is that there's a much stronger perception, let's put it this way, a much stronger perception in Japan about this dependence on external fuel sources than there is in Europe. In Europe, we, I think, really have cut the umbilical cord, and we did so literally, by the way, last weekend once more, with regard to external energy supplies, and we've really tried to develop something that is close to energy self-sufficiency. We're nowhere near it yet, but we're getting there. I think in Japan, there is a lot of people still whose first reaction when you talk about renewable energies or whatever it is yes, but, we're a fuel deficient country. We need to import our fuels. Very important. We need to preserve that capacity. So that's both a common point, but also something where we maybe look at things a little bit differently. We have a comparatively large and affluent population, which means mostly not so much that we can afford energy, but that we consume a lot of it, and that capacity is indeed increasing, as we just discussed. We have a strong industrial base on both sides. We have very dense transportation networks, which again is relevant in terms of energy and decarbonisation. We are technologically advanced places. The capacity to develop high-tech products and solutions is very developed, but this is also the opportunity that we have. But more importantly also politically, we are reliant on rule of law, including international law, whether it's maritime law, trade rules, or similar things. And that means that we have a need for stability. And that in today's context is not something to be taken lightly. We are dependent on the United States on both sides in terms of our security. Also very important, and you see everything that's going on right now. Don't want to go into the details, but there's a lot of things to digest there, let's put it this way. Looking closer again at energy, we are very much dependent on critical raw materials, which for a very large part we have to import. We're beginning to discover in Europe now that we have resources that we didn't know we had, but it's still so that we are dependent very much on them for importation from other places in the globe. And the question is very much, where do we get them from? We have a very similar approach to economic security thinking, and Japan actually preceded the European Union quite a bit in developing a very detailed, very specific economic security agenda. And whilst the thinking was quite developed at our end, the real strategic putting everything together is something that is more recent at our end. Now, what do we not have in common? First of all, geographical position. And I don't just mean Asia versus Europe, but also the fact that Japan is an island country, and therefore has not the same kind of perspective on interconnectivity and connecting of electricity grids and energy networks that we have in the European Union, where we, however, have developed quite a bit of experience over the last few years and the way in which we set up our energy markets. We also have a slightly different outlook, I would say, as to how we approach decarbonization. And this is, we have different ambitions in terms of our targets. We saw it from your presentation just now. We also have a different take on the phase out of fossil fuels, which we are trying to accelerate much faster here in Europe, particularly with regard to coal. Those are not necessarily incompatible visions, but they need to be taken note of, and maybe there's also space for complementarity. Well, and then, you know, what is it that we can do together? We have a very, very extensive cooperation between the European Union and Japan. And one thing that I would posit here that is that if I look here from coming back to Europe now, after having been in Japan for 4 years, the perception of the importance of that cooperation is probably stronger in Japan than it is in Europe overall. Whereas we both need each other in to an equal extent and to equal levels. And it's probably a good idea for us to look at this a little bit more closely. And this cooperation, of course, and the capacity for it and the drive for it has intensified significantly after 24 February 2022, as you can imagine. So that's an important part. We need more cooperation on economic security. It's already pretty solid, but we certainly can build it out. We need a far stronger cooperation on things like supply chains. We need to talk intensively, but even more intensively on materials, and also on everything related to disinformation. Why do I mention disinformation? Because one of the files that I'm dealing with for the moment is not related to Japan at all. It's actually the EEA agreement and Norway. And there is, those of you who will have followed the press in Norway, there is a lot of disinformation going on there that affects directly how we cooperate on energy. And this is something that is happening all across the globe. It's not just happening in this particular area. We're dealing with it here in Europe as well, and it also leads directly to the perception that people have of the energy transition as such. So very, very much a common problem where we can develop things further together. And then there is, I think, a lot of work that we can do together on enhancing the awareness on the hidden energy riches that we do have, which is everything related to renewable energies. So you mentioned a lot of them, solar energy. You didn't specifically, I think, mention wind energy, but wind energy is still one of them. One area which is underrated, I think, in Japan, but where there's probably scope for cooperation is geothermal. I know that there's a lot of concern among the onsen community in particular with regard to geothermal. But I just had a conversation with colleagues from Iceland, for example, who are using geothermal extensively and still have hot springs. So I think there are areas here where that we can explore together. I think geothermal is something that still needs a little bit of work here in Europe as well. So something that we can look at. Efficiency gains in buildings and housing is another area which I think is really absolutely important. We have an enormous backlog here in Europe, and as you know, under the second von der Leyen Commission, we have now set up a housing task force to look at affordable housing, which will also look obviously at everything that's related to energy in that particular context. So an area where I think there's a lot of work to be done jointly as well, where we can learn from each other. Everything that's related to grids technology and infrastructure security is a particularly important area as well, particularly because it intersects with areas where there are common strengths, such as in IT and cybersecurity, where we have intensive dialogues as well. Working together internationally, the latest example of our close cooperation here is on methane and on the Global Energy Transition Forum, which was launched just recently, where I think we have a common agenda to pursue and where our cooperation internationally is going to be really important. And then one thing related to everything that's resources that I think is particularly important is to see that we do not outcompete each other on looking for these resources. Because we both have this interest, for example, in critical raw materials. We both have an interest in gas markets. But you can deal with it in two ways. You can say, well, I'm getting there first, and therefore I will have the resource first. Or I'm going to outbid everybody else, and then it becomes extremely expensive. Or we can step away from the zero-sum game and see what are the approaches that we can pursue. And again, in the current geopolitical context, I don't need to paint a picture. This kind of dialogue and cooperation is going to be particularly important. And then lastly, cooperation in third countries is something that I think is something that has enormous potential, because we have a lot of an interest on both sides to work together with our partners in what we sometimes call the Global South, not a perfect expression, but ever, to ensure that everything that is energy transition can happen there as well and is taken on board and can happen as efficiently and effectively as possible. And this is something where there is an enormous amount of potential for us to work, both in terms of developing markets, but also in terms of developing technologies together with these countries. Voila. These are the points where I think there's the potential for us to cooperate, where we can work together. And then, we have a lot of instruments that are already existent. I'm not going to list all of those because you will not remember them anyway. But just to mention 2 or 3, we have the Green Alliance between the European Union and Japan, which offers us real opportunity to discuss both climate, but also the energy transition. We have a cooperation instrument, memorandum of cooperation, I think, on hydrogen, where there's a lot of potential, and we still need to make that work. We have something called the Connectivity Partnership, which relates very much to cooperation on infrastructures and things of that nature in third countries. Voila. That's basically it. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of points for cooperation. Some are very strongly ongoing already. Some could certainly be further developed, and I'm sure we're working on this. Now, let's go to the next speaker, Felix Mattes, who, if I understand correctly, Felix, you will be, in next 2 weeks, or so next few weeks in Japan again on hydrogen. Maybe you have an answer to the issue, how do you have energy, more weight of a security, low carbon, and increased competitiveness? I'm sure you're asked the same question in Berlin as well. Huh? If you give it back again.
Okay, I'll give it back to you. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I've prepared some slides, which are, frankly speaking, a little bit the European view on the different battlegrounds and arenas and agendas we will probably face in Europe and in the European Union and in Japan. There are differences, there are commonalities, and I think it's always interesting to highlight the different perspectives on the same issues. And no, that's not the right. That was the presentation from this morning. Could you load this? Without PowerPoint is very difficult, but there's a second one. It's called On the Way to Net Zero or something. No, that was the morning presentation. Okay, as long as the presentation is loaded, I think I would like to make a couple of distinctions between fields we need to discuss. The first is we need to talk about legislation. We need to talk about aspirations, and there is a difference between legislation and aspirations. And in the end of the day, we need to talk about the policy mix which we are facing. And the policy mix depends a little bit of on the phase of the transition we are facing. And maybe it works. Then we change the order because I will present some numbers and this is important. Okay.
Good try. Okay, so if it's okay, we move to you, and you have prepared a presentation which will be loaded, I'm sure. So, Xavier, you load the next one. You get a microphone in this. Oh no.
Okay, nice lady. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Ryusuke Shida from the Mitsubishi Research Institute in Japan. I'm looking at the whole picture of the energy system in Japan and also the energy businesses. But today, Mr. Sakamoto already mentioned about the whole picture of the strategic energy plan. So I'd like to highlight what's going on right now in Japan's energy policies and businesses. So I'd like to mention, the focus on the several topics, yes, about the Japanese energy situation. So first one is, sorry for the same slide in the morning session. I'd like to mention about the electricity demand increase in Japan. As Mr. Sakamoto already mentioned about that, now the Japanese electricity demand trend is reversing. As you can see this slide, the actual electricity demand was decreasing historically because of the population decrease and also the energy efficiency improvement, like appliance and also the heat pump or something like that. And also the spread of the solar PV, residential solar PV, because this is the electricity demand in grid. So if the residential PV spread, it means it is behind the meter. So the total electricity demand is even total electricity demand is the same. The electricity demand in grid will be decreased because of the the solar PVs. But since last year, this trend was changed, and as you can see, from the forecast in 2024, and this year just published last month, the forecast in 2025, the Japanese electricity demand is going to increase. This is because of the ICT sectors. As you can see, the data centers is now very highly active because of the against the backdrop of the digitalization and also the AI things. It is not only limited to the Japanese company, but also the US company and the Singapore company now try to invest in a data center in Japan. And also the semiconductor factories is driven by the digitalization trend. And this is very large, the large factory is now planning to be built. The famous one is TSMC in Taiwan. They are try to build a new factory, semiconductor factory in the Kyushu area. And also the US company Micron Technologies is also the big giant, try to build a new semiconductor factory in the Chugoku area in Japan. So the point is how we supply this electricity, new electricity demand. As you can see, Mr. Sakamoto already mentioned about that. Now, new basic energy plan shows a very ambitious renewable deployment, but in reality, it's not easy to install the new renewable capacity because Japan has a very high geographical constraint. So it's very difficult to find the suitable land for the PVs, grid scale PVs, and also in terms of the wind power, the offshore wind power, the geographical location is a little bit different from the Europe. So the offshore wind has technological difficulties. So in my personal view, the natural gas is highly expected to be filled in this gap. So if the electricity demand is going up, the more energy will be needed to fill this new demand. And the second point is, as I said before, just renewable expansion. So seventh basic energy plan. Basic energy plan is the same as a strategic energy plan. And sets a very ambitious renewable target. I know that EU has a more ambitious target, but still this 40% to 5% is ambitious for Japan. But this has a lot of challenges, I think. So you can see the right figures. It shows a trend in the feed-in tariff and the feed-in premium certification volumes for solar PVs. So after this rule started in 2012, this and the 2013 has a very large amount of the certification volumes. That after that, this certification volume is decreased, and actually the installation pace is going to be slow in Japan. But this left figure shows the government target is more ambitious, so even the speed will be, installation speed will be higher than the actual pace. So this is a huge gap between that. So the point is how we incentivize this renewable expansion. And also, you can see that there are a lot of heavy reliance on the solar PVs among the renewable sources, but a little bit small amount of the wind power. This is one of the reasons of that is the offshore wind is highly expected, but there are a lot of technological difficulties. So, but it's very ambitious for how we can find new land for the solar PVs and how we, promote the technological innovation to meet that target. But one good news, or one good the trend is now Japanese government support battery storage heavily, and this graph shows also this is not number, the capacity of the connection applications for the grid scale battery storage. As you can see, the December 2023. It is only the 272 megawatts. But after the 9 months, the September 2024, the number of the connection application megawatt is almost more than 3 times. This is because of the government support. They subsidize a lot for this battery storage installation for the capex, and actually in 2023 decarbonization power auction was held, and this exceeded the expected maximum. So only the 1/4 of the tender only was winning. So the sorry, the 4/3 of the rest of that is cannot take that subsidy. But this shows a very high, the battery storage is very active in Japan right now. And this subsidy will continue because of the new basic energy plan already also mentioned about they will keep this kind of subsidy for the battery storages. This is to meet the demand of the renewable expansion and to ensure the stable grid operations. The last but not least, I would like to mention about the energy price in Japan. This one of the what's happening in Japan is energy subsidies is still going on. So it is just after the the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, 2022, and Japanese government also faces the high energy prices, and to how to say, support the low-income households. Japanese government started the subsidies for the gasoline at first, and then after that, electricity and gas. And but it's very how to say, difficult to find the exit of these energy subsidies. Now still keep going. This is continuous, and Japanese new cabinet also mentioned about we will continue this kind of the energy subsidy even after this year. So but personally, I think this is not good way for the support the low-income households, because first one is this is a very, how to say, very big impact for the national account. It pays a lot for this energy subsidy, and it is also against climate goals in Japan. So this kind of the fossil fuel subsidy is not good way for the long-term measurement. And the last one is it's a little bit ineffective for this kind of the poverty support, because I think the UNEP published a report about the ineffectiveness of the fuel subsidies. Like I think only 7% of the fuel subsidies goes to the low-income households, because the high-income household consumes more energy. So it's not a good way for the this kind of poverty support, I think. But the point of this story is how, if the energy transition goes further, maybe the energy cost will be higher. So how we find the economic growth by the energy transition, this is still under the discussion. It's very big issues. But in my opinion, one of the solution is, the, how to say, the cooperation with the international cooperation, especially for the developing countries. They also face a high energy cost, and to the cooperate with such kind of countries and just export to the kind of the Japanese high efficiency, the energy efficiency products, and also the cooperation with natural gas and the hydrogen, such kind of things, and create new business is one of the exit of this, how to say, economic growth by the energy transition. Okay, that's my.
Thank you very much. Did we receive the right presentation? Yeah. Thank you very much. When you talked about ambition level, it also depends, of course, on the natural endowment. And as you showed, when you rely more on solar and less on wind, then of course battery or storage becomes very important. Then you may just be in a different cycle. Now, just one question or two is, when you talk about grid scale battery storage, because we probably use a bit different jargon, what do you mean? Is that utility scale batteries, or is it sort of the household?
Yes, it is grid scale, the UTT scale, and it is directly connected to the grid. It's not the kind of the on-site of the renewable sources. So just the kind of the merchant power plants, like they absorb the electricity from the grid, and then send electricity to the when the price is high in the market.
Yeah. Okay. So it's to reduce or to address the flexibility needs. So with solar PV, of course, that becomes more important. This gasoline, subsidies. You don't like electrical vehicles in Japan?
I don't think that that. Japanese government tried to promote the EVs, but the total share of the EVs is still low in Japan. So just to the support for the low income households, subsidy was taken.
Felix, it seems to be, let's try this one, and if not, we try 3 times. I think it should be okay now.
Does it work? Yeah. Okay, if you could load the presentation. So what the purpose of my presentation is a little bit to draw a map on the energy transition, where we are heading for, and then to derive some issues and some fields or some arenas which would be very suitable from my perspective for the cooperation. Again, I'm a member of the German-Japanese Energy Transition Council, and so we try to organize an exchange on the different views, but also on the converging views, and that's very important. And for this purpose, it's extremely important to describe where we are and where we are heading for. The first slide is, and this is a major difference. This is the general pattern of the climate policy architecture of the European Union. And this is not aspiration, this is legislation. This is legislation with very hard sanctions. And I don't want to explain this in detail. I would only highlight two pieces of this climate policy architecture. The first is the light red triangle, which is the European Union emissions trading system number 1. And what you can see here is that we have a rapidly decreasing cap of emission allowances for the heavy industry and for the power sector. And in the year 2038, according to the recent legislation, no aspiration, legislation, in the year 2038, for the last time, emission certificates will be issued to the power sector and the steel mills and the cement factories, etc., etc. And the second, and this is the dark blue triangle, is the emissions trading system number 2, which hopefully will start in the year 2027. And under this scheme, again, legislation with sanctions for the last time in the year 2042, emission certificates will be issued. That means climate neutrality is in the legislation before 45 and earlier for the power sector and the heavy industry and for the road transportation and for the buildings some years later. Again, this is a major difference because this is a hard legal framework for all the activities in the European Union. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, it doesn't. The next slide is, I think, important because we need to talk about numbers. And this is modeling, this is not legislation. This shows you a couple of results from modeling for Germany and for the European Union. I think it's important to bear these numbers in mind. And as a good researcher, I always try to formulate this in a formula. And if you ask me what is the purpose of the energy transition in Germany, it's 10-43-17, which gives you the framework of the transition. And in the yellow box, I wrote down the European numbers. And these are at least the agendas for policy making. So I don't want to go into the details of the German numbers, but for the European Union, we have always calculated with doubling electricity demand. So for the 2040-2050 targets, we need to get more than 5,500 terawatt hours of green electricity and a little bit more than 500 terawatt hours of nuclear electricity, which is more than the double of the recent status. We are in green electricity, we are at 1,500 or so. That means this is rolling out the renewable power generation by the factor of 4 and limiting the decrease of nuclear somehow. So in the end of the day, we will talk about a European electricity system which is able to supply 6,000 terawatt hours of carbon-free electricity. At the moment, we have a total power generation of 2,600 or something like this. But this is about electricity, and it is very important to bear in mind that there is a world beyond the electricity, and we tend to discuss on electricity, but the next step or next phase challenges, these are not that much about electricity. It's probably a little bit more on others. And therefore, I think we have the debate, or we have different debates, for example, in Germany and the European Union. The European Commission does believe that we don't need to import hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives, at least according to the impact assessments. The Germans see this a little bit different, so we assume at the moment for climate neutrality, alone for Germany, we will need to import 400 terawatt hours of hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives. So the Commission says we can produce these all inside the European Union. I would put some question marks on this, but that's the recent modeling. We have biomass. It's a limited resource, 300 terawatt hours in Germany. More than 2,000 is assumed for the European Union, and then we will see domestic production of hydrogen, where we, at least the Germans, we think that we will be able to produce a quarter of the necessary hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives demand within the country, and we will import 75%. The European Union or the European Commission sees this differently. And last but not least, we will need to bring a significant number of tons of CO2 underground. So here the German number, 70 million tons of CO2 to be stored in geological formation to achieve climate neutrality, and so the fourfold of this probably in the European Union. So, and these numbers, these 6 numbers describe in the end of the day the policy arenas we need to deal with. Unfortunately, we had an event in terms of energy prices. You can see here the wholesale market prices for the different commodities. You see the 22, 23 peak, and you see the futures as the market they see at the moment. And that means over time, the situation will somehow relax. But the 2020s will essentially continue to be a death valley for European industry. And to bridge this death valley, where we see in the 2030s more or less a normalization of this, but we need to do something during the 2020s. And the other point is that we see a relaxing situation with regard to natural gas, etc., but we see a little bit less relaxing situation with regard to the power, because a part of the decreasing trend of the fuels, which somehow translates also in electricity prices, will be compensated by the increasing CO2 prices. And that means we have a challenge that the fossil fuel prices decrease and electricity prices also will decrease, but much less. And for the energy transition, where electrification plays a major role, one of the fundamental preconditions is that we get a certain ratio between fossil fuels and electricity. And my theory for the time being is a lot of the transition will be accelerated if we are able to achieve a ratio between electricity prices and natural gas plus CO2 of about 1:2 or 1:3. If we are going to achieve this ratio, then the transition will be much easier than in the opposite case where a share is opening. And so there we have a long-term perspective on climate neutrality, which is about 2040, 2045, 2050, but we also have special circumstances during the 2020s. That is important because we are at the turn of between different phases of the energy transition. So we have used to roll out the renewables, electrification, energy efficiency in buildings, etc., etc. All these challenges and all these policy fields will remain important, but we will have some new kids on the block. And these new kids on the block is the natural gas phase out, which is essentially about the buildings and the industry in Europe. We have the phase out of fossil oil, which is essentially in the European Union the transportation sector. And we have the ramp up of hydrogen, which is essentially the industry sector. And then we have CCS and others. And the bloody lesson learned for the European Union, if we don't have an integrated set of strategies, we will fail. And these strategies are written on the right side there. We need to pave the way for the clean options. It's clear that we are good in this. But on the other hand, we need to actively manage the exit game for the high carbon assets. This is a design thing. It won't happen by alone. We need to initiate the necessary infrastructure adjustments in all the fields. I will come back to this in a minute. We need to sort, and that has been mentioned, to timely ramp up the necessary value chains. So critical materials, etc., avoiding the innovation development and going for international stuff. And the last, and this is a European challenge, but this is important. The new phase of the energy transition is characterized by two new circumstances. First is we are getting much closer to consumer than we have been during the last 20 years. And number two, the transformation is a transformation to capital-intensive solutions in general, but with one exception. In all fields, renewables, heat pumps, electric vehicles, it's going from OPEX intensive to CAPEX intensive. For the industry, it's getting from CAPEX intensive to OPEX intensive. It's different. This is a different thing. And that leads me to my last chart. And this is essentially a map of the different policy arenas. So market design is a major issue. So market design with for electricity with high share of renewables, we don't see these high integration costs in the European Union. So we are beyond the 40%. We don't see these high integration costs, but we need to think about market design for electricity, for gas, for hydrogen, but also for CO2. We need to work intensively on infrastructures, because the infrastructure is a key precondition also for electricity, for hydrogen, and for CO2. We need to have a debate on industrial policy, because especially as you come from Germany, there in theory no industrial policy, in practice a lot of industrial policy, but to have enlightened approaches to industrial policy which is sovereignty oriented. And I think this is a key issue. And then we have some framework conditions. We need to have faster processes. We have European integration. We have financing, equity stuff, et cetera, and we have the issue of social embedding. And I think what I would like to go through with the Japanese colleagues through these different arenas, and let's have a look. Okay, where can we have lessons learned? Where do we have convergence? Where do we have interesting, or where could we have interesting exchange of experience? And where we have differences? We have some differences. But I think this is the map, from my perspective, for a potential European-Japanese cooperation, because sooner or later all these issues which have arrived at the European Union and which are arriving at the European Union policies system, would sooner or later also arrive in the Japanese transition policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, here we have the agenda. We can go through, can pick one after the other. I haven't forgotten you're the first one. Just one point, I think, which is worthwhile picking up what Felix also said. The energy transition now, or the low carbon transition, has now entered at the consumer level. And that is a very different game than when you have it at industry or electricity. And, you know, to what extent is it in Japan at some stage? Would like to hear whether you're already adding, is it really starting to hit, or whether you're still able to shelter or pretend to shelter your consumers. No, I would like to open the floor for questions, comment, ideas for cooperation, whatever you wish like to say. There was one here, so we need to have balance. So there should be one here. Then I just go. It's all right. Oh, okay, you do. It's fine. Then, yeah. So, please, yeah.
About the difference between the increase in solar prices when the increase in renewables in the electricity mix increases. And I wondered if you could explain that a bit more, because theoretically, increasing solar has almost zero marginal cost. So theoretically, as you increase solar, theoretically the cost shouldn't increase so much. For nuclear, I understand. And can you tell us as well about how that would impact geothermal, if geothermal has the potential also to do this? Because again, you have these zero marginal costs. And then I have a whole list, but don't worry, I'm not going to ask them all.
Go on.
No. And then if I can, to Shida-san, about hydrogen, because when I worked in this area, hydrogen was the big issue. Japan and EU spent all their time talking about hydrogen. In the context of transport, do you think this has been left aside now, or is this something that is still of interest in Japan, since you're Mitsubishi? You weren't the ones talking about hydrogen specifically.
Thank you. Could I just add on my favorite topic, the battery, the solar panel, solar PV and batteries, which in India now is becoming a dispatchable source. How do you see this developing in Japan? Is there real investment, and is this the solution? I mean, one of the solutions to the flexibility. So maybe we start with Toshi, and then we go to Shiba-san.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions, which is quite reasonable. What I have presented is LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. This is not the marginal cost of electricity, it's a total cost throughout a lifetime, starting with the CapEx, including the OpEx and the decommissioning cost. So if we look at the electricity cost without integration cost, solar is the cheapest. But as the variable renewable energy capacity percentage increase in the total power mix, the cost of solar power significantly increase. This is because a number of factors. The first, the grid needs to be expanded. And secondly, the battery needs to be installed. And also, the curtailment, power curtailment cost needs to be considered. In the sunny day, in the weekend, solar power plant sometimes create more power than we need, making it our power system unstable. So in that case, we need to curtail the power generation by solar power, which decrease the total cost. Which increase the total cost of solar power. That cost increase is quite significant for solar power as the percentage of variable renewable energy capacity increase.
Okay, thank you for your question. The first question is about hydrogen. Okay, yes, hydrogen is also the highly expected in the Japanese energy transition measurement. But as you know, the point is cost. The cost is still super high in the hydrogen in Japanese market. I remember now the hydrogen is the price is in Tokyo is 300 yen per normal cubic meters. But if we, the competitive, same as natural gas, it should be the 20 Japanese yen per normal cubic meters. So the price should be the more less than the 1/15. Should be, so this price gap is still super high, and compared to the like other renewable sources. So now Japanese government try to the incentivize and also the subsidize the hydrogen usage, but after that, how we keep on such kind of the support in the long term is a very big issues in Japanese market. So this is one of the difficulties for the hydrogens. And one thing is I'm from the Mitsubishi Research Institute, but Mitsubishi Motors is a different company. We only share the Mitsubishi brand. There's no capital tie between the Mitsubishi Motors. And the second question is PVs in India, right? Yes, and yeah, just it is, I think, that good news for the to have choices of the solar panels, because now the solar panels is mainly from the China, and it has a very competitive price. But in terms of the economic security, it's better. It is good news for the have different choices. But now Japanese government try to develop, the promote domestic PV sales, like the perovskites, the new next generation the PVs. So because one of the ingredients like a source is is coming from the Japan. So by using such materials, Japanese government try to develop the new next generation the PV panels for industry.
Thank you. We have now, Felix wanted to come in, and also Heitze. And if you wish to make a comment, just, give us a sign, please.
Again, the role of market design, and I think the battery example is an interesting example. So we have in Germany at the moment 4.6 gigawatt installed battery. With almost no state subsidy, and that shows that the drivers of the battery or the flexibility are depending on market design, because essentially you have two drivers. The first, you could put question marks as from an overall system efficiency, is own consumption. It's optimizing own consumption. This is not necessarily the economic optimum for the system, but this is the major driver. And the second driver, at least in the Central Western European electricity market, is the intraday electricity market. Because the fluctuation in the intraday electricity markets are in between so high that it is extremely attractive for battery investments. That depends significantly whether or not batteries are meeting the pre-qualification conditions for intraday power markets. And therefore, a wise market design can trigger a lot of these efficiencies, even in an economic efficient manner. And again, so there are integration costs. The integration cost, you can debate whether this is 20 or 30% on top of the LCOE. I would question if it's more than the double, but again, the key question is, what is the mechanism you can set up to bring it in? And the last, and I'm the co-chair of the National Hydrogen Council in Germany, and therefore I need to talk about a little bit on hydrogen. So we are in the debate, in a little bit of a death valley of the hydrogen debate in Europe at the moment. However, there is one thing very clear. There is no alternative to hydrogen in certain industries. And if we want to achieve climate neutrality, at least in the basic material industry, you can discuss what share will be maintained here, is depending on hydrogen. Full stop. It is expensive, so we have at the market €7 per kilogram at the moment, which is extremely expensive, but we need to deal with these, and this is part of the industrial policy. Because the modernization cycle for many of these installations is now, and not in 15 years when the hydrogen is important. And therefore, the focus is on industry. And this is important because, and this is again, this phase change. So we have focused energy policy and climate policy for many years of the power sector. And that was right, because it was the biggest emission source in Europe. But in my country, in the next 2 years, the electricity sector will not longer be the number one in terms of emissions. It then will be the industry. And we need to make hydrogen available to the industry. We have a second smaller segment where hydrogen plays a role, but this is again because of the market design. So in my country, we have already the ETS number 2. We have €200 per ton of CO2 in the highway toll for lorries, and that sums up to an overall CO2 price of €450 for freight transport on highways, which is attractive for lorries with hydrogen. However, it won't fly if there is no infrastructure at the highways for hydrogen. And so in transportation, I think with cars, it's gone. For many fields of road freight transportation, it's gone, but there might be a 20% share for the long distance heavy duty trucking where hydrogen can play a role. However, this depends whether or not in my country, do we spend 5 billion for the hydrogen infrastructure at the highways? If we don't, then that won't happen. If we do, it is attractive even with only small state subsidies. And therefore, my point again and again and again, we need to not to discuss on subsidies besides some industries and the Death Valley and the 2000. We need to talk about market design, because the market design drives the reliable and robust demand for these solutions. And we are slowly arriving to this debate in the European Union, and we also can discuss on hydrogen and power stations, etc., etc. But we are slowly approaching this, and my interest would be that this issue of market design, which can drive this transportation, should get much more in the focus than it is today.
Thanks. Yeah, that's maybe that's an issue which we might want to continue as well. I mean, in the future debate about hydrogen, but also EU, Japan, there has been a comment. But first, I think Heitze wanted to come in, if I'm correct, and then we go to you, and there is another one. It's always the same towards the end, the questions pop up, so we will take the two together, and then we have to wrap up. If I understand correctly, you don't have any hard constraints, so if you take 2-3 minutes more, that would be okay. Please.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short, because a lot has already been said about this. But the first thing is, I would caution to look really closely as to what cost calculations you use in order to determine whether the inclusion of renewables in the electricity system is viable or not viable. Because it really depends on what the perspective is there. I don't think that it's just a question of adding sums up. The second one is, and that's just anecdotal, I came across this curtailment issue in Tokyo when I was there as well, which is that there was electricity shortage in Tokyo, but it was a shortage that happened because the grid did not have the capacity to absorb the wind energy that was being generated, and that had been curtailed. And at the same time, there was an electricity shortage because of interconnectivity issues. So I think in addition to the market design, there's a lot that needs to be looked at in terms of grid design and the capacity for the grid to absorb renewable energies, because it's a different way of absorbing it than others. And then the last one I wanted to say is that you have the same thing that's happening, that happened on solar panels and solar PV, that's happening on batteries right now. So to keep it very short, my point would be that on batteries, we should not be looking at how expensive they are. We should be looking at how can we make sure that we keep up to date with the battery technology that is currently being developed in China, and that will kill off the European and Japanese industry in this area if we don't pay attention. It's not going to be a question of the cost of batteries at all, I don't think.
Thank you. Two more points. You mentioned grid. We have the Hitachi people in the room. I'm sure they will be happy hearing this, because they're owning ABB, one of the leading companies. Now, you have a point, and I shouldn't have made this commercial, I guess. You have a point, and then you over there. And please be short, and then we start to wrap up.
Hello, Christoph Christians from Toyota. First of all, I want to endorse Mr. Siemens' comments on hydrogen and transport. I think it's a very difficult debate, but indeed, if markets are designed correctly, there's indeed with heavy-duty trucks also what Toyota is investing in quite a market that can be tapped. I wanted to ask a question, and it's a little bit linked to one of the graphs that was shown on that the energy prices in Europe will remain quite high over the 2020s. It's something that I think a lot of industries in Europe are grappling with. But we see a current sort of debate in Europe. Okay, if we can't make products cheap enough to make them attractive, clean products cheap enough, we're going to introduce buyer's mandates, be it in fleets, be it in lead markets for steel or whatever products. Personally, I would say that's quite a concerning evolution. If we can't make the products cheap enough, we're going to force it onto people. I just wanted to ask well, first of all, it's an observation, but please feel free to disagree. But also what the experience of Japan in that is, in the experience of making clean products the cheapest option, which is what the route that the US took with the IRA, which we failed to do so until now in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one, I guess, last comment. I'll take that one.
Maybe you can go without microphone. Yeah, I can try. One question for Mr. Siemers in particular. You listed all the areas in which there is an opportunity for increased cooperation between Japan and Europe. My question would be, do you think that this is mostly potential cooperation, or do you think this opportunity is actually enacted by European investors, European companies? So even maybe looking beyond the field of energy, do you think there is, when you look, for instance, at FDI, there is interest of European business in a mature market like Japan? Thank you.
Heitze, if I could add on to this one, how do you see the potential of EU-Japan cooperation in third countries. You know, one of the big issues on the Clean Industrial Deal to come out is the industrial partnership or climate industrial partnerships, which of course needs a critical mass to be credible. So that's one of the points, and all the others may have a last word, just to a last comment, but I have to ask you to be short, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's keep it short indeed. So the first thing is opportunities for cooperation. I think most of that is already working one way or another, but there's certainly opportunity to beef it up, and it would take me too long to go into the specifics, so I'm not going to give you the details. There are some areas where it's already working very well. There are others where we are just beginning. Yeah, but the opportunity is there. FDI in Japan. Tricky issue, but yes, I mean, in general, there are opportunities there, and I think there's particularly opportunities in the industries of the future. So we had one of the slides was talking about IT, for example, what Rapidus is doing, the TSMC investments, what's happening in terms of data centers and so forth and so on. There's an enormous amount of, and it's not very well known, but an enormous amount of fab technology available here in Europe that is certainly something that can be used for then investing into activities in Japan. Grids is one area where I think there's certainly an opportunity for doing that as well. And then lastly, cooperation opportunities in third countries. I think it's massive. But it's also incredibly difficult because a lot of this cooperation depends not only on the companies, but it also depends on the financing mechanisms that exist on both sides. And the typical thing that we found out is that the way in which these financing mechanisms operate often is an obstacle to achieving the cooperation on the ground that we would like to have. But there is definitely an opportunity there because the expertise that exists, particularly in things like energy and IT in Japan and Europe, is something where we have enormous market opportunities and enormous opportunities to assist countries in, for example, developing solar PV as an energy source and be less massive antiquated power plant dependent in countries that are still building up their electricity grids. Voilà, trying to keep it short.
Thank you. Toshi, you have listened to all of this. You work on this. Where do you think, very short, hopefully, where do you think should be the next step of EU-Japanese cooperation, external, internal? Where would you put the emphasis to?
This morning we discussed the national gas issue, and I see a lot of potential for EU-Japan. For example, yeah. Also, theoretically, it could be considered that the third country collaboration, the joint development of hydrogen. In the Middle East, for example, jointly develop the blue hydrogen or ammonia. You know, if we work together, the demand is bigger. That is the reduce the total cost of hydrogen and ammonia production. This is actually happening, for example, in energy development. A lot of companies are participating from different countries in a single development project of LNG. Why not hydrogen? Why not ammonia?
Heitze, you know the insight, at least from the EU and Japan. Institutionally, is everything set up, or is there still some missing gaps to improve the cooperation, EU-Japan? It's all there. Very short, very clear. Felix, yeah, we know market design. I come to you at the end, if you don't mind. Now, what would you think, what is the area you would like to discuss, you know, when Felix comes to Japan, you know, should you be in Japan, from the EU side? What are the issues that have been brought up here? What do you think could really be interesting, you know, in discussing? Toshi mentioned a few, So what would you be a main interest? You, no, now, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, question again. Sorry, I thought question to the Felix, but to me, okay. So sorry, so you can you say that your question again? Sorry.
What would, you heard all the EU, Japan cooperation. So what would be the area you find most interesting to discuss with European counterparts?
Okay, thank you. I think what I came up with in my mind is a kind of the hydrogen and natural gas, because this area requires a lot of investment for the infrastructure. So, and sorry, the hydrogen. So, I think it's important to create a new market for this kind of the new energy sources, and how the sharing risk is really important. So when we invest the new technologies, if only one user it's not good for the market. So many users will be more the preferred for the new energy sources. So one of the point is how we collaborate with this kind of the new energy market, and that requires a lot of investment. So I think one of the example is hydrogen.
Thank you. Felix, I know you want to discuss market design. You have mentioned that. Wait. No. When you are in Japan the next few weeks, what are the kind of, you're speaking now as Felix Mattes, not as Hydrogen Council. What are one of the topics you really would like to discuss in Japan? What has gone wrong in Europe or Germany?
Yeah, that relates to the institutional arrangement, because I'm convinced we are not yet there with the institutions. But I think in terms of topics, everything, I think, and we need to differentiate, let's say, the greenfield topics and the brownfield topics. Greenfield, everything what is new. Hydrogen, second generation electrification, infrastructure beyond the existing structure. This is new. This is greenfield. This is very productive for an exchange. Then we have other fields where we have traditional conflicts. Let's say when I was 20 years ago for the first time in Japan, and you mentioned carbon pricing. Oh, wow. You were kicked out from the panel, yeah, that was, or liberalization of the electricity market. It's not possible. So at least this market design stuff, including carbon markets, there the Europeans can deliver some experiences, and this would be worth. And vice versa, if we discussed for the first time in Japan industrial policy, the German representatives left the room because industrial policy is forbidden. That's not the way it's working here, and therefore I think we have a lot to learn in terms of enlightened industrial policy, which can guide us through this Death Valley and this transformation towards the, let's say, steep part of the abatement cost curve. And there we can learn a lot. And that brings me to the formats, because there are natural limits to official formats. So, and I'm often taken part in this. If you are a government official, you only can discuss your success stories. The best lesson learned is always from the failures. And there is some barrier for official exchanges to really to have an in-depth discussions on failures, and therefore you need something what I would call the medium level of exchange, where academics and think tanks and others can play a role, because they are they have much more degrees of freedoms to tell the lessons learned from the failures. And I think this format is a little bit lacking, especially if you are in our cultures. And I understand the differences in cultures, but we need to develop these. What do we learn from failures, and how can we improve these? And that requires new formats of exchange and new formats of cooperation.
Thank you. That was a very appropriate closing. We didn't collude. So my immediate solution or conclusion would be now we all adjourn to a closed room and then we discuss the failures, and then in the evening we go home with a lot of new expertise. But let me finish here without concluding all the points. Too many issues have been mentioned. I just wanted to thank again Irina for setting this up, this whole half day and this afternoon. I think it was very successful. Would also like to thank all the SAP staff for having helped here very efficiently to organize this. It was a pleasure again working with you. Now the meeting is adjourned, but I'm sure the topic will stay with us and we will continue this, and I hope to see you soon on this topic to continue the discussion, including the failures, if somebody dares to speak up. Thank you.